The wind curled like a whisper through the canyon, cold and unkind, carrying with it the scent of pine, distant firewood, and a storm not far behind. Silas Boone rode through it, his coat pulled tight across his chest, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadow over a face carved by weather and years. The gelding beneath him made no complaint, hooves thudding soft into frost-hardened earth. Twilight hung heavy. The world, in that hour between light and dark, seemed to hold its breath. He didn't much like this part of the year, when the trees grew bare and memories rose with the smoke of his evening fire. The little log cabin at the ridge had once been warm with laughter, the smell of biscuits, the sound of her humming while she brushed out her hair. But 5 winters had come and gone since pneumonia stole Clara, and in all that time, not once had Silas let himself believe the place could feel full again. He spotted the girl as he rounded the trail's last bend. Just a silhouette at first, slight, unmoving, her arms wrapped tight around herself. The snow hadn't begun yet, but the sky was that color. She didn't flinch when he approached. "You lost?" he asked, voice dry as mesquite bark. She shook her head. Her skin, where the firelight from his cabin flickered across it, was the bronze of river clay, her eyes wide and dark like storm-washed stone. A scrap of a blanket clung to her shoulders. "I need shelter," she said, calm as the moon. "Just for one night." Silas glanced toward the cabin, toward the memory of silence, and then back at her. She was no older than 20, maybe less, with the look of someone who'd known hunger longer than comfort. He said nothing for a beat too long. "My name is Ayanna," she offered, though he hadn't asked. He dismounted without a word and motioned her toward the door. The fire inside crackled low, casting golden shapes across rough-hewn beams. Ayanna stood near it, letting the warmth seep into her limbs. Silas poured a cup of coffee from the pot he always kept going, handed it to her. She accepted it with both hands. "Where you headed?" he asked eventually. A long pause. "Nowhere anymore." He didn't press her. Didn't ask what she was running from. Maybe it was the quiet way she looked around, like she expected something to be taken from her. Maybe it was the tremble in her shoulders that said she'd gone too many nights cold. Either way, he let her stay. Just for one night. In the town of Cinder Bluff, news traveled like prairie fire. By morning, a pair of ranch hands from Vex's place had seen her shadow at his window. By noon, the barkeep was asking questions with too little subtlety. That evening, Silas stepped into the general store and felt the quiet pull of every eye in the room. "Cold night to be entertaining," Harlan Vex said, too loud and too slow. Silas said nothing. He picked up flour and beans and left with his jaw set tight. When he returned, Ayanna was sweeping the porch. The broom handle looked too big in her hands, but she moved with quiet certainty, like she'd been tending spaces far harsher than this. "You don't have to do that," he muttered, more uncomfortable than grateful. "I know," she replied, and kept sweeping. The next morning she was still there. "I'll go after breakfast," she said, reaching for the pan to fry eggs. "No need," Silas said, then cleared his throat like the words had caught. "Storm's coming. You can stay till it passes." That storm stretched into days. And then a week. And somehow he didn't ask her to leave. She made herself small. Fixed the broken latch on the barn. Gathered firewood without a sound. When he coughed, she brewed something sharp and bitter that soothed him better than any doctor's tonic. He didn't ask where she learned it. She didn't offer. Sometimes she sang when she thought he was out of earshot, low, mournful melodies in a language he didn't know, but felt in the marrow of his bones. He'd stop mid-step on the porch, eyes closed, letting the notes wrap around the cold like a blanket. He never told her he listened. They spoke little and never of the past. Yet in that silence, something steady grew. It was the little things. Ayanna sliced her bread and left the crusts on his plate, like Clara once had. She lined his boots by the door just so, and mended the frayed cuff of his coat without comment. Once he found a pine cone set on the windowsill, just one, perfect, unopened. He didn't touch it, just left it there. The town didn't care for it. Not the whispers nor the looks. Vex stopped by with 2 deputies one morning, leaning off his horse like a man who'd been waiting for trouble to sprout. "Heard you're harboring someone don't belong," Vex said, eyes glinting like broken glass. "She ain't yours to question," Silas replied, voice low. Ayanna stood behind the screen door, a stillness in her limbs that Silas recognized. The kind that came before a fight or a flight. She didn't move when the deputies glanced her way. "She stole from my stockpile last month," Vex lied. "Got witnesses." "You ain't got a thing," Silas said. "You taking her side over decent folk?" Vex asked. "Over your own?" Silas stepped off the porch, slow and sure, eyes locked on Vex. Ain't many decent folk round here last I checked. They left with dust trailing behind them. That night Ayana didn't hum. She didn't speak. She just sat by the fire, carving something small from a piece of driftwood. "Why'd you do it?" she asked finally, not looking at him. He didn't answer right away. "I've seen folks thrown out for less," she continued, voice quiet. "You risked everything." Silas shifted in his chair. The fire cracked between them. Didn't feel like a risk. She glanced at him then, truly looked, and for the first time he didn't look away. The next morning he saddled both horses. "You ever ride a trail long enough," he said, "you forget what Seton Roots feels like." She looked puzzled. "Thought maybe you'd want to come into town. Ride beside me." She didn't answer. Just stepped into the stirrup and swung up with the grace of someone born to it. They rode in silence, the road winding down toward a town that no longer felt like it fit either of them. Folks stared. Vex stood on the porch of the saloon, arms crossed. Silas tied off his horse and turned toward the door. "Stay here," he murmured. "Or come with your call." Ayana watched him step inside. A long, breathless pause hung in the air. Then she dismounted and followed. Silas spoke plain. "She's with me. That's all anyone needs to know." Someone spat. Another scoffed. Vex stood, lips curling. "She ain't one of us." "No," Silas said. "She's better." The saloon quieted. It didn't matter if they believed it. He'd said it. He'd meant it. And something inside him loosened that had been tight for years. They left in silence. But not shame. The wind had softened by the time they reached the ridge. Snow still clung to the trees, but the cabin light was warm when they arrived. Ayana stood for a moment by the threshold, then stepped inside. They never spoke of marriage. Not really. But come spring, he built her a trellis of willow branches and planted wildflowers beneath it. She pressed her hands to the wood and whispered something he didn't ask her to translate. That night, she placed her driftwood carving, an eagle, wings outstretched, above the mantel. It wasn't loud. It wasn't celebrated. But it was theirs. And sometimes late at night, Silas would rise from bed just to listen to her breathing, steady and sure. He'd never thought the house could feel like a home again. But it did. And in the hush between midnight and dawn, he'd whisper thanks to the quiet for bringing her to his door. Because sometimes, love doesn't knock. It simply arrives.